I'm reading from the book of Mark, the 16th chapter, the first 8 verses. Saturday evening, when the Sabbath ended, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome went out and purchased burial spices so they could anoint Jesus' body. Very early on Sunday morning, just at sunrise, and we had about 40 of us at sunrise up on the mountain here. I didn't see quite all of you, but it was really nice. Very early on Sunday morning, just at sunrise, they went to the tomb. On the way there, they were asking each other, who will roll away that stone for us from the entrance to the tomb? But as they arrived, they looked up and saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled aside. And then, when they entered the tomb, they saw a young man clothed in a white robe sitting on the right side. Who do you think a young man in a white robe? What was he? What do you think? You think he was Jesus? It wasn't Jesus. What do you think? An angel, you're right. It was an angel there. This man in white clothes sitting to the right. And the women were shocked. But the angel said, don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He isn't here. He is risen from the dead. Look, this is where his body was laid. Now go and tell his disciples, including Peter, that Jesus is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there, just as he told you before he died. Now the women fled from the tomb. They were trembling and bewildered. And they said nothing to anyone because they were too frightened.
He is risen.
He is risen indeed.
Awesome. I gotta catch my breath. Love's sacrifice on Friday really only has meaning because a grave stood empty today. Think about that. We put a lot of emphasis on Good Friday and on the sacrifice on the cross. But the sacrifice of Good Friday really only has meaning because there is an empty grave today. Don't miss out on the truth of the empty grave. Our God is alive. And because of that, so are we. And that is something to celebrate. And so on the count of 3, I want you to celebrate like that is the most awesome thing you have ever heard. 1, 2, 3. All right, pretty good, pretty good. But my friends, if we think that Easter stops here, we are missing out. Because God is alive and at work in our world today. Our world, this world that is full of great diversity and great beauty and great creativity and great love, sometimes seems like that love kind of gets smothered or buried under the atrocities and the evil that we can hear about every single day. But God's love for you and for me and for every single person, God's work in the world today, it's there. We just have to be open to how God chooses to show up. There was once a little boy who decided he wanted to meet God. And so he knew it was a long trip to wherever God was, And so he packed his backpack with Twinkies and root beer. And right, sounds good. And he started on his journey. And his mom asked him as he was starting out, where are you going? He's like, I'm going to go meet God. I'm going to go find God. And she's like, okay, just be back by dinner. And he's like, okay. And so he walked about 3 blocks, and he came to a park. And in the park, he saw an older woman sitting on a bench. And he sat down next to her. And he dared to glance at the older woman. And as he did, he caught her eye, and she gave him the most beautiful smile ever. And the boy loved that smile. And he loved that smile so much, he wanted to see it again. And so he was sitting there, and he realized he was a little hungry. And so he got into his backpack, and he pulled out a Twinkie. And then he thought, maybe the older woman is hungry too. And so he offered her a Twinkie, and she smiled at him. And he loved that smile. Well, as they were eating Twinkies, then the little boy thought, well, he got kind of thirsty, and he thought that maybe the older woman was thirsty too. And so he got in his backpack, and he pulled out a root beer, one for himself and one for the older woman, hoping that maybe she would smile at him one more time. And the little boy and the older woman sat in the park all afternoon, eating root beer, or drinking root beer, and eating Twinkies, and smiling at each other. They didn't say a word. Well, as the day went on, the little boy realized that it was probably getting close to supper time. And so he knew he needed to be home. So he started to pack up his bag and get ready to head back home. But as he was getting ready to leave, he knew he wanted to see that smile one more time. And so he ran over to the older woman and gave her the biggest hug ever. And she gave him the biggest smile ever. And the little boy headed off home, and when he got home, his mother asked him, "So, did you find God?" He said, "Yes." And she has the most beautiful smile ever. The older woman went home to the home that she shared with her son. When she walked in the door, her face was beaming and radiant, and her son said, "Mom, what did you do today that just so filled you with joy?" And she said, "I had root beer and Twinkies in the park with God, and he's a lot younger than you think." My friends, may you know the power of the empty grave today. May you know the beautiful smile of God's love in your life today. May you know the joys of Twinkies and root beer today. Because when we choose to live with this wildly creative and redeeming God, when we choose to follow this loving and grace-filled God, when we choose to embrace the power that is within us because we have a risen God, we can embrace the power of Jesus' life and death and life again. And as we choose to do that, my friends, don't miss out on the possibility that God might just want to show up in you, that God might choose to show up through you. And don't give up the idea that God just might want to share Twinkies and root beer in the park with you. Will you pray with me, please? Good and gracious God, we give you so much thanks today For this is a day that is filled with joy and wonder and beauty and awe. But Lord, as fabulous as this day is, I pray for each one of us that it would not simply be a moment in time in a building called a church, but that we would truly live with the power that is in us because you died and rose again. And in that, we know how deeply we are loved, how far you will go to make sure that we know we are loved by you. Lord, let it not be just a celebration today, but let it be the very way we live. Keep our hearts and eyes open to your presence, to your working in us and through us, and things like Twinkies and root beer. I pray this in your name and power, and all God's people said. Amen. All right, stand. Will you please stand? Receive God's blessings for today. May the God who has the power to raise Jesus from the grave, and the God who has the power to bring new life to you, the God whose power sends us out, be with you today and always. Amen. He is risen. He is risen indeed.